I'm going to move over into the software here so we can take a peek at that. And I've logged into our software application, Compligo. We are at the home page. There's a lot of information here, but we'll save the remedial type of view of the system for another time. We also have great content up on the web if you want to get a feel for the software. But with this, we're going to skip a lot of that and go right into the meat of complaint tracking as it works. And to do that, what I'm going to do is take sort of a day in the life type of approach to this so that you get a feel for how this could work within your organization. So, for example, I'm a call center worker, and when I come in for the morning, I put my coffee down, I turn on my computer and check voicemail. I find that there is a customer complaint on the voicemail, and this individual is talking about unfair treatment because their loan payment due date lands on the first of every month. So the customer is requesting a 1-month deferral without penalties because they think they're being treated unfairly. So as a person that is getting the call and I've got the permissions to start working on this, what I'm going to do, since I heard that word unfair, is I'm going to go into my library and briefly look up anything that we have that addresses this. And so you can see that we've got a policy here on unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices, also known as UDAP. And I can quickly open that up and review this before I start working on the complaint. This is something that I have access to, that I've been permissioned to see, so that I can jump in here, look at this, make sure that I am within the parameters of the law before I start working on this complaint. So I've gone through, I've read through this, I understand the parameters that I can operate within. And now what I'm going to do after this refresher's done is I'm going to start out by opening up a complaint. And here with Compligo, it's going to reside down here as one of our applications that can, again, add that to a lot of other parts. So again, we've got training up here, we've got reporting, all the other great stuff. But now I can open this up, and this will actually take me to a place where I can begin to work on that customer complaint. There is a lot of information here, and rather than having everybody on the phone watch me type, that's as entertaining as that may be, I'll save you a bit of time. And what I'm going to do is open an existing complaint, and then we can work through that very easily. So what I've done is I've moved over into our queues tab, and this is where a lot of the complaints can be stored. So again, normally if there was one that's been submitted, it can reside in any one of these different categories. So I'm going to open up intake just because I know that's where it lives. And then I'm going to move over here over to the search queue, and I'm going to pull the one that I created yesterday as an example of consumer complaint. So here it is. One thing I'll let you know before we hop out of here, we'll get into queues a little bit more later in the webinar, but essentially you can think of this as a group email box for the time being. So I'm going to view this right now. Again, if I'm that person that's working the phones and I get this customer complaint coming in, the thing that I can do then, again, is start going through the process. Intake, escalation, response, analysis, and resolution are the areas that we want to focus on. So let's start out with intake. It is important that you're recording and categorizing any of the complaints that come in by either the topic, the channel of intake, or by the product. And we can do that very easily here. So you can see that we've already categorized it by collections and servicing. So that's the way that it came in. This is where we want it to go. Again, you can see that we've got other things like the priority. I set this one to medium. And then we've got the source where it came from. So we've got some really early on codification of this complaint that's come in. I can now have that ready to go. I can search on any of these fields later if I want to bring this up. Also to mention to you, I am able to, at the time of implementation, specify what it is that these are going to be. So if you don't like the type that's showing up here, we can change these, we can add to them, we can delete some of them out of there. It's really an adaptive service that we want to make sure that we're working how you work rather than forcing you into a way that we think is best for you. I've added the type of complaint here as part of my intake. I've added the priority. I've added the source where it came from. And again, this is going to be that customer calling in. It could come from the CFPB, an employee, a partner, or affiliate. But now I want to talk about status because this gets to escalation. So the program has to appropriately escalate complaints that raise legal issues involving a potential customer that could be in relation to harm from an unfair treatment or discriminatory or other regulatory compliance issues. Since I am the call center person and I heard that word unfair, I went, I read that UDAP. I've now come in here and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we're following that process. So as part of that, again, we've got the intake taken, the main office is located here, and then we've got the date that it came in. I've got some preliminary information about the person that had called in, and then down here, I've got my issue summary. So this gets into a lot of the type of things that we're going to deal with in the next stage, which is the response. So my response to this is I want to quickly transcribe that voicemail to make sure that the person of interest is, we're adding that information to the system as quickly as we can right here. The next stage that I want to do is I want to start documenting everything that has happened, because again, if I ever have to refer back to this, I want a full log of what's taken place, the efforts that we've gone through and measured to get this information in front of the right people in my organization. So again, part of that response is also the SLA that we have set up, or service level agreement, to make sure that we're responding at the right time. So we've talked about the routing piece. Now we want to really focus on getting this logged and working within the parameters of how your business sets up their policies and procedures. For example, here we want to talk about the fact that we maybe have a 48-hour turnaround. So when somebody writes in, we want to make sure that we get back to them within that time frame. I can track that very easily here, and we'll show you in reporting where you can also track it to catch up on it. But again, you can see that I got that call. I recorded the first contact with them. If I wanted to open this up, this shows the discussion that I had with the individual on the phone. So he was very pleasant, but he was upset. He's requesting a month deferment of payment. So we've got that recorded. This is going to be actions that I've taken to resolve this complaint. Down here, I wanted to escalate this to my supervisor, and I did in this example. You can see that Daniel's requesting a deferral, and I'm asking if we can move the date for him. This might be a possible solution instead of pushing him out 1 month. Back up at the top where we had the status here that says intake, I simply changed that to supervisor review, and then I would submit it at the bottom, and that would move it to my supervisor automatically. These, again, are going to route this around to the individual. So if my supervisor then wanted to get a legal opinion on this, they could route it to legal. When legal clicks complete, it would bounce back to the supervisor, and then that supervisor can send it back to intake, for example. We can bounce these around to the different queues as needed to make sure that the right person's getting this at the right time, and we're gathering that feedback. Down here, you can see that I had the response from my supervisor, said go ahead and work with Frank to adjust the date. And then the next stage down here, we can see that we're working with the client to make sure that we've got that information. One other thing that we can do is we can also add attachments. So you can see here, I've got the text of the loan agreement. If I click that, that brings that up so that I can review that very quickly. This is just a random image that I pulled off the internet, but it gives you a feel for the type of things that you want to add to the system. For example, in this one, I had put a note in there, and you may have seen that on the previous screen, that I had not only called the customer back, but I've also reviewed his policies with him so that he has an understanding of what's taking place and that this is the agreement that he signed off on. That gets into more of the analysis. So again, what we're trying to do here is, in addition to track all this, is start looking for things like root cause analysis. What are the underlying factors in the complaint? So again, with access to that type of information, we can determine that pretty quickly by pulling that up, reviewing it online, and then working with the client. You know, other things that we could be tracking are things like regulatory or compliance complaints, trying to determine where does this fall. This one turned out to be more of a customer service issue, so we're going to work with the customer to try to make sure that that individual is happy as he can be. Not all customers are going to be happy with the resolution, but we want to make sure that we're working towards a fair resolution of the complaint. Now, we have enough information here that we can work towards closing this out. So you can see that I've got the paragraph here where I spoke to the client, reviewed that signed contract, which was down here, showed him where he agreed to the payment schedule. And if I want to see the rest of that, simply open that up and I can read that very quickly here. So he was happy that we could move the payment date. That's going to preserve his credit. The individual can hit the 15th. That makes it a little bit easier. I've got notes here that I'm going to follow up later with a written letter to the customer to make sure that that's all set. From here, I can move into more of the resolution phase of the complaint. I can come down here. These are all values, again, that you can specify. But if I want to specify that we're going to close this out with non-monetary relief, I can go ahead and put a real quick note here about what it was that we did. Customer agreed to the new due date, say complaint closed. And down here, and click submit, and we're done with this complaint. From this point, now that we've gone through the resolution phase and we've talked about the documentation, we talked about everything that we wanted to do to make sure that we had that in process closed out, is move back over into more of the reporting and analysis of the bigger picture type of things. For example, we've got a few complaints in this inbox that have been stacking up. I'm going to move over into the reports area, and we'll start off with the dashboard. This is where we can do some very quick trend analysis. And I'm not having to write code. I'm not having to find somebody to build the report for me or spend time doing that. This is automatically tracked based on the information in real time that's coming through from our complaints. For example, we want to really understand that the complaint data is going to drive any adjustments to business practice and process. So analyzing these trends across all complaint types and time periods to identify any trends in the organization is going to be very important. For example, we've got the complaint volume by type. I can simply click on this, and this is going to show me the composition of that chart here. Behind this fraud bar, you can see that we've got a number of different cases that have been opened, and you can see the severity levels as they've been ranked. You can see what the status of the complaint is, as where it came from, customer names, and assignees. So if I really wanted to dig in here and look at a lot of that information, I can simply, for example, open up that first one. You can see that it's frozen because it's closed, but I can still get a feel for what this complaint was about, so I can start looking for those trends and trying to see if there's an area that I need to work on as far as my business is concerned. I'm going to move back into the reports area, and there's the dashboard here. That's how that functions. So again, I just simply click on that. I can get the data that's behind the chart, but that also works for, volume by source. Are they coming in from a particular channel? Did we send out some advertisements that confuse people that we need to quickly address? You can see here, for example, we've got, again, a spike in the fraud complaints that have come back in for this organization back in April. That might correspond with something that had happened in the organization. And you can see that it's nicely dropped off for May and June. We haven't had a whole lot coming in. So there may have been an event in my organization that triggered these complaints to come in. By volume, by source, by month, we've got that, as well as the volume priority by month. Now, one of the other things that we talked about earlier was our service level agreement that we have internally. So I want to make sure that my staff is responding to these complaints in a timely fashion, that they're going through and they're addressing these as quickly as possible. Because again, as Brian's going to discuss, the CFPB is going to be looking at that. Your bank's going to be looking at that. They want to make sure that these aren't things that are just getting blown off, that you're actually addressing them. The way that you handle the complaints is going to be an indication about the company culture, how you're handling business in general. And that's going to be that canary in the coal mine. And this is pretty much your coal mine that we're looking at right now. I'll open this up, and you can see that we've got some complaints that are in the 0 to 7 days. We've got a bunch of them stacked up over here because this is a demonstration database, and then as the days and weeks go by, these pump over into each category. So these have filled up. But if this was something that was in real life, you had a section that you had a number of these that, for example, were stuck in legal review. You could click on that number 27, and that's going to take you to the data that's behind that chart as well. So I can see all of my complaints that are in legal review, and I can open these up to see if there's any notes from legal about the complaint to make sure that we're addressing these correctly, or maybe there's a larger issue at hand that we need to discuss. Again, we've gone through and we've looked at the charts. We were trying to identify, again, gaps or weaknesses. We're trying to figure out what kind of training we want to offer to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we want to look into this to make sure we can remediate the trend. At this point, we've decided that there are certain types of topics that are escalating. So, for example, if there's a big piece on fraud, what we might want to do is assign out items to my employees based on the role they play in the organization, so that that information is available to them. We train them up on that. And again, we won't go too deep into this, but just know that you can then start adding these policies and procedures in there, interactive trainings, things of that nature, to make sure that the employees are aware of that. And then as they're completing these items, they're signing off on them, they're completing the trainings, they're being scored and graded on the different things like interactive policies or any sort of computer-based trainings, and that's being recorded in the system that you can report on later, just to be able to prove that you have that round trip. So we've got you covered end-to-end with this system, very easy to use, and again, with the ability to track those complaints, to track the fact that we're training people, and then report on that outwardly to an auditor or a bank is pretty critical and actually pretty easy to do, as we had just seen.